You know what? Just call us Costco, because there was so much stuff here that we got to give it to you in bulk. That wasn't the best analogy, but you'll see what I mean in a second. I am Griff from GA. Welcome to the Pro Wrestling Musings Podcast. Joining me today, Ryan and Peter Edge from ProWrestlingMusings.com. Peter, this is his first time on the Pro Wrestling Musings Podcast, and what a debut to make, because we got so much stuff to talk about, so much stuff that we couldn't fit it all in our normal Pro Wrestling Musings podcast, which, by the way, check that out if you want a review of Dynamite. It was excellent. We talked with the man who correctly predicted that Juventud Guerrera would be performing on Dynamite, so go check that out. But as for right now, there is a ton of stuff that we need to get to, and we will start out with some news that has been kind of trickling in over days and over weeks, but we just want to kind of get it all out there. The insane ticket sale numbers that AEW is doing for some of their events, mainly Grand Slam in New York on September 22nd and the First Dance in Chicago at the United Center, the second episode of Rampage. Ryan, when you look at these, I mean, it is insane that AEW is moving tickets. They've sold both out. We're talking, 15,000 tickets or more for each. When you look at this, I mean, how encouraged should AEW be from this? Is this like a one-time thing, or do you feel like this is something that we could expect in the future for AEW?
The fact that they were able to sell out a 1-hour show in Rampage, I forgot how quick the tickets ran out, but I know they sold out quick. The fact that they did this for a 1-hour show, that should be extremely encouraging. I don't see WWE even doing this type of thing. At this point, I think overall, we're kind of in something of a renaissance, if you want to call it that, because I don't remember a time, as long as I've been watching wrestling, where another wrestling company in the United States outside of WWE can sell out tickets for arenas that big, that fast, I know WCW was selling out the Georgia Dome back in the 90s at the height of the Goldberg era. Mm-hmm. But since then, we haven't really seen that. So I think it's really encouraging. A part of me thinks that a lot of this has to do with the fact that the world is kind of going back to normal after the coronavirus. That's a whole other issue because it's kind of coming back, but that's besides the point. I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that the fans are sick of watching crowdless wrestling shows at this point, and they're tired of not being able to attend. So if there's going to be a big event like those two events, then why not go all out and go to these events, right? So I think that has a lot to do with it. But I also think that the fans are just really into the AEW product. So obviously that's a great sign. The fact that we have so many rumored incoming talent in the form of CM Punk, Daniel Bryan, or Bryan Danielson, possibly Adam Cole. Some of those are rumors, some of them are speculations, whatever. The fact that these are possible wrestlers to come into the company, that's also allowing the company to be like, you know what, we're going to do some huge shows. If we're going to maybe bring in these people, you'll just have to wait, I guess. Overall, I think AEW should be happy that this is happening, because obviously they're doing something right.
Yeah, it's and we'll get to a few of those names that you mentioned in a little bit, but specifically on the topic of CM Punk, what I find is so interesting is that you have these two shows. You have Grand Slam at Arthur Ashe Stadium in New York, the place where they play the U.S. Tennis Open, and they sold, I think, 17,000 tickets for that, and then they sold out the United Center. I can't find the exact number, but it seats at least 15,000 for wrestling. Some places have said it could be as many as 20,000. And they did it for two completely different reasons. So Grand Slam is just, like, there's no card, there's no specific thing that was announced there. They just said, we're doing this show in Arthur Ashe Stadium, and that sold out. And then for the First Dance, for the Rampage show, they basically, in so many words, confirmed that CM Punk was going to be debuting at that show. We again talked about that on the last episode of the Pro Wrestling Musings podcast. But Peter, what I find is so impressive is the fact that these two completely different ways of selling these events have both ended up in the biggest sellouts for AEW in their history so far. So what why is it that AEW was able to market these two events so differently and end up with the same result?
Well, I think with Chicago, it's the power of Punk, isn't it? I mean, yeah, he's the biggest star, one of the biggest stars of the last decade. If you really look at what happened posters, the Summer of Punk, and certainly that he brought a lot of mainstream attention to WWE at the time through Bill Simmons and I think it was Grantland at the time. They paid a lot of attention to Punk and WWE at that time, and I think really that was visual effects. And it's not often I quote Jim Cornette, but how will we miss you if you won't go away? And Punk went away for 7 years, and he's back. And I think so many people are excited. So many people, you can see that with the ticket sales. So many people are just looking forward to seeing Cult of Personality, blaring out on the speakers and him coming out and possibly confronting Darby Allin. If we look at what happened last week on Dynamite, that seems to be the way they're going, and that's why I think Chicago is where it is. With New York, I think it's really, first off, it's a unique arena. It's Arthur Ashe. It's in Queens. It's just you're a tennis fan. I'm a tennis fan. We like, we know what that arena's like. It's one of the loudest arenas in tennis. It's just this unique center. And I think also I know a lot of people were talking about New York and if it was sell out, and people talking about, I think New Jersey is the week before, if I believe right.
I think that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of people were talking about New Jersey, and really talking about whether or not that would affect the sales for Arthur Ashe. But I think it was never going to affect it because that event was due pre-pandemic, and I think a lot of people held on to their tickets, didn't get the refunds, and I think a lot of people who bought the Newark tickets, which sold quite quickly at the time, if I recall correctly, they've held on to those tickets and they've now bought tickets for Arthur Ashe. So they're going to, anyways, I think you're going to see a lot of the fans who went to Newark going to Arthur Ashe at the same time, or a week later, sorry.
Well, it's certainly one of those things, and you make a great point that we've never seen wrestling, at least in a long time, in an arena like Arthur Ashe, and I think a lot of people, I wonder how big the intersection is on the Venn diagram between wrestling fans and tennis fans. I think it might just be you and me, Peter. That's it. We might be the only two people.
Yeah. Apparently Andy Murray used to be a fan growing up. Andy Murray used to be a big fan of wrestling. Yeah, okay. I read that. I saw that in an interview years ago. So yeah, that's my only other tennis player wrestling correlation.
We'll add a third to that intersection. But I think a lot of people are going to be surprised at how the arena looks and really how loud it is. Because you're absolutely right. Anyone who watches the U.S. Open knows that just there's something about the construction of the arena, the fans that go in it, because New York fans are always loud no matter where they are, and the acoustics around it. I mean, it just gets really loud, and so I think a lot of people are going to be pleasantly surprised at the energy around that show. And obviously, when you talk about that show, you also have several people on AEW that are proud New Yorkers. Most notably Proud and Powerful, which we've talked about before, and I believe if it were me, I would have them win the titles at that show. I think that could be an all-time kind of pop, if you get that moment. And so I think from AEW's perspective, what is encouraging to me looking at it is the fact that they structured this Chicago show pretty much around CM Punk. They opened the ticket sales after they announced what it was, and they had Darby Allin make the best in the world comment and all that kind of stuff. So pretty much everyone knew what it was. But the New York show, they didn't say anything. They just said, we're doing this show at Arthur Ashe. And that's it. You don't get anything about it. Their poster has like 1,000 people on it, so you don't even know who's going to be the headliner there. We don't know who's going to be the world champion by that time. And it's like, we don't know anything about what's going on, and yet that one sold out. That, to me, is almost more impressive than the Chicago thing. Because it's in a venue that's never hosted wrestling, and it's just 17,000 people who want to watch AEW. and for no other reason. They're not turning up for someone specific. They're not turning up for a specific match. They just want to watch AEW. And what's encouraging is the fact that AEW has now they've basically proven that people just want their product. They don't want something in particular. They're not being dragged by one person. Ryan made the comparison to WCW performing in the Georgia Dome. They were carried by Goldberg in at that time. People showed up to watch Goldberg, and a big reason why WCW failed after that was because they didn't get to see Goldberg. And so now they're like, Goldberg or not, I don't want anything to do with this company. AEW is the reverse. There's not one person that people are turning up to see, which to me is the most encouraging part out of all of this. If you are an AEW fan, or obviously if you're in AEW, but credit to them. They've earned that after doing this for 2.5 years, building up that trust with the fans.
Oh yeah.
So you go, Griff. You're sorry, mate. So you go first, mate. Sorry.
No, I was just agreeing with that, honestly. Like, yeah, no matter what, if you're a fan of AEW, the chances are that you aren't going just to see one person. It's not like there's one megastar that everyone is clamoring to see. It's not like a popular concert where you have the headliner and you have all the featured acts, Mm-hmm. I know that I personally, even though I appreciate Kenny Omega as a wrestler, he's not the person I would want to go see if I were to go to an AEW event. There's so much going on there, Mm-hmm. So I really appreciate that about AEW.
I think I think it's the point that was made earlier. It's like obviously 16. How long has it been? It's almost been 16 months. Of empty arenas, of no crowds. And it's quite interesting. Mm-hmm. I'm just looking at the WrestleTix Twitter site right now, and as of July the 30th, Homecoming in Jacksonville, Florida, they've only sold 61% of the capacity for Jacksonville, and I think that's really evidence of that. That's probably that's the slowest selling ticket they have right now. Is AEW is an arena where they've been for the last 16 months.
Yeah,
like new arenas, new cities. I think people are just really eager to go and see wrestling. Even I think people are just really want to go and see wrestling again. And I think that's the Jacksonville numbers tell you that.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right, and I think they're eager to see quality wrestling. I don't want to dunk on WWE, but the facts are out there that WWE has struggled with their ticket sales ever since they returned to the road, and AEW is doing better than they've ever done. And I think a big reason for that is that if you show up, even if you get a bad Dynamite, it's still a pretty good wrestling show, all things considered. So I think there's, again, that kind of level of trust that goes into it when you pay your money and sign up to go see an AEW show. You're trusting that the quality is going to be at least at a certain level. And so far, from my perspective, I mean, you can call it bias or whatever, but from my perspective, it always has been. I've never watched a Dynamite that I'm like, my God, I wish I didn't watch that show. You know what I mean? I've never had that. So, and again, it's credit to AEW for making that happen. Now, what I think people really want to talk about, and this is the reason, we talked a little bit about this on the podcast, reviewing Dynamite from this last week, reviewing Fight for the Fallen, but everyone has a different perspective on how this should go, so I feel like we should bring it up here. CM Punk, I think it's obvious that Punk is going to be debuting most likely on First Dance on that Rampage episode. So now that we have two people who were not involved in the podcast where we were initially talking about Darby Allin's call out of Punk, we get to do a little bit of fantasy booking here. So Peter, I'm going to turn this to you first. Short term and then medium term. What is the direction you'd like to see for CM Punk? How quickly should he be in the world title picture? Should he be in the world title picture at all? What is your ideal for CM Punk right now?
I think short term, Darby Allin at All Out seems pretty obvious right now. Mm-hmm. When it comes to the world title picture, essentially, it was interesting. You were talking earlier about matches for Arthur Ashe, and it's interesting. I actually kind of like in my head was thinking earlier, like what would main event Arthur Ashe, and do you put Punk in the main event against Kenny Omega for the world title, or do you go Eddie Kingston in the main event? Because you're talking about hometown boys for Arthur Ashe, Eddie Kingston is Queens through and through, and he would probably, but would Punk be a better one? He can do this absolute gigantic dynamite. It'll probably pull one of the best ratings. You know, probably there's a chance if you do Omega versus Punk for the world title at Arthur Ashe, it will beat Raw for viewers. Not even 18 to 49. It will beat Raw when it comes to total viewers if they do that. But I don't see AEW as a company that does short term booking, and they're not going to do something like that just to get proper rating. There's a game plan here. Punk, I think the sensible idea might end up being Punk at Full Gear against Omega. Think that
where would you put Hangman in all this? Because it looks like Hangman and Omega's not happening at All Out. There's been some speculation that it might happen at Arthur Ashe. So, I mean, do you think it could go there, or are you talking just extend?
My All Japan head, my All Japan Pro Wrestling head, who watched a lot of Kenta Kobashi on YouTube over the pandemic, it tells me he ended up being the most beloved wrestler in All Japan Pro Wrestling in the 90s, and they held off. It took Kobashi 4 years to be a top-line gauging a foreign wrestler, an American wrestler. It took them 4 years. It took them 4 years to get Kobashi to beat one. It took him 6 years for Kobashi to win the Triple Crown. I'm not saying to go that long. That's ridiculous in modern wrestling standards. But I'm going to make the prediction right now, and if it doesn't happen, you can call me out on it on the podcast in 8 months' time. I think it's going to be Double or Nothing. I think Hangman Page wins the world title at Double or Nothing. I think it's the first Vegas show with crowds there where they always hold Double or Nothing is in Vegas. I wouldn't be surprised if they did like the first StarCast back from the pandemic with Conrad Thompson and his StarCast deal. It could end up having a WrestleMania weekend feel about it, and in front of a full house in Vegas, Hangman Page hits the buckshot lariat again on Omega. 1, 2, 3. A new champion is crowned.
That would be something. This is why I like talking to new people about this, because you always get different perspectives. And we were kind of on the podcast a few days ago. We were all operating sort of under the assumption that they were just pushing Hangman and Omega back like a month, so that they could do it in New York. Or I guess that's 3 weeks. We were operating under that assumption. No one brought up the possibility of extending it all the way to Double or Nothing 2022. But it's a really interesting perspective. Ryan, I know you are a big Japanese wrestling fan. I know that you've been watching it for a long time, and obviously long-term storytelling like this is certainly not uncommon over in Japan over the years. So, do you feel like AEW could extend Omega and Page that long in order to do Omega and Punk first? Would that work? Would fans accept that?
I mean, they could, but I remember when Adam Page's first main event run, or at least his first initial foray into the main event scene, after that ended, he really cooled off, amongst fans, amongst whoever, in terms of momentum. I really believe that let's just say, if WWE let a wrestler cool off as much as AEW has with Adam Page, everyone would be calling to cancel Peacock, So I think AEW is lucky that they've been able to get Adam Page's momentum back, and they should be lucky that he's such a likable guy, because I don't know how much longer fans will be able to sit here and be like, you know what, this is a long-term storyline, let's just wait it out, let's see where everything goes. I really feel as if this story is nearing its natural conclusion, considering the trajectory of Adam Page going from where he was when AEW started to this anxious millennial cowboy, and now he's gaining his confidence back. I personally would really like to see this storyline, or at least him win the championship by the end of the year. I think him winning it at Full Gear could be pretty awesome, considering that it would be about a year after Kenny Omega beat Adam Page to become number one contender for the AEW World Championship. So that's where I'm thinking about that, if we have to move it from All Out to sometime in the future. I really think that fans, well, me too, I've been guilty of this. I really do feel as if that a lot of the times us wrestling fans excuse these failures in storytelling as long-term storytelling, I guess you could say, because so many of us have already been conditioned to deal with short-term storylines. We want to see storylines extend as long as possible because that's good storytelling. The truth is, it's not good storytelling all the time. Sometimes it's just elongating it, you know? I think
absolutely.
In cases like Kenta Kobashi, that's kind of an anomaly because he was easily one of the best wrestlers in the world. He could pull that off. He pulled off that super long losing streak for the first major chunk of his career and made it out on top by the end. But by the time he really ended up on the top, he was already past his prime. We look at 2003 when he finally, well, he's fought Mitsuharu Misawa multiple times, but that 2003 March 1st, I believe, March 1st, 2003 match against Misawa, that really felt like the passing of the torch, right? But at this point, Kobashi was a little bit past his prime. Still one of the greatest matches of all time, and he would still have some of the greatest matches of all time beyond that. But he was definitely not at the top of his game. So these are two different situations, if you ask me, but there's still a chance that if we were to extend the storyline for that long, for example, is Adam Page really going to be as good as he is right now? You know, so I don't want this storyline to go that long for sure. I don't know. It's a wonky situation. I think that they should definitely pull the trigger on this sooner than later, I guess.
Can I just throw in a massive anomaly and like a massive like wrench into about Adam Page? It's a crazy idea. They're not going to do it, but it's interesting. How about Adam in that little period of time in my head of what I think they should do, August to May? How about in the interim periods? In that period, you have Hangman Page win the TNT title for the Dark Order. It's the ultimate feel-good storyline. It's like, you know, he finally brings the TNT title back to the Dark Order because, you know, that could be then. And that keeps Hangman Page a bit busy for a couple of months, and then he loses. And then maybe I don't know how he loses it. And then that's the first title defense when he. I don't know. There's a massive flaw in that plan. That means that Page has to lose, which we don't. I mean, obviously, Page is probably the one wrestler in AEW who can lose, not too often, obviously, but you know he can. You know, he's got. You know, I don't know. It's a crazy idea that he wins the TNT title for the Dark Order. Yeah. It's a bit crazy, but
you know,
go ahead, Ryan.
You know, I really wouldn't want Miro. Sorry, WWE brain right there. I really appreciate Miro as champion right now, but I think that would actually be a pretty great idea sometime down the line. Maybe after Miro loses the championship, there could be a transitional champion, and then Adam Page could swoop in and win for the team. Feel a good story, whatnot, whatever. I think that would actually be a decent way to allow for Adam Page to not have to gun for the world championship, I guess. That's a pretty good idea.
The thing is, though, okay, I'm just trying to remember sorry, pardon me. I'm just trying to remember. What's the stipulation that he never ever challenges for the title while Omega is champion? Was that the stipulation? They were very vague about saying that, weren't they?
Yeah,
Well,
I suppose so. I mean,
How do you get around that?
In the sense that they didn't say he can't challenge while Omega is world champion, they just said champion. So I guess in that sense,
Yeah.
I mean, I guess so. I'm looking at it from the perspective of I've seen lots of people that have said, AEW should not get into the business of moving storylines, of changing storylines they had just because someone is getting involved. Just because they have a new toy, so to speak. So I would say that if they were to delay the Hangman story that long, it would seem to me to be because CM Punk got involved. Like, if CM Punk didn't get involved, Hangman would probably be winning the title at All Out. And I was actually convinced on the podcast a couple days ago, I was convinced by Sergi and Jacob that in the case of CM Punk, the reason why they couldn't do Hangman and Omega is because you want that nuclear crowd reaction to it. And the problem is, that's going to be CM Punk's first match, presumably, is going to be at All Out. So you're kind of in a lose-lose situation. Like, if you had Hangman and Omega in the semi-main or in the co-main but didn't go on last, then you'd have the fans going nuts, but then they have to calm down again because CM Punk is about to come out. And if they had it in the main event, then you would have had the fans just seen CM Punk's first match in 7-8 years, whatever it is. So I think that moving it from All Out for that reason is legitimate because you want Hangman to have his moment, but delaying it all the way into next year just because you did that, that's what I'm not sold that you could do that. I think you could go as long as Full Gear. I think you could go as far as Full Gear with this story. If you tried to go beyond that, I'm not sure that fans would really buy into that. I think what would happen is they would turn on Omega. There are already fans that are not huge fans of Omega's title run. So I feel like you would just have more and more people just totally turn on Kenny as champion. Maybe they wouldn't, but that's the risk you run, in my opinion, if you try to delay it this long.
He already has a tiny bit of go away heat considering his character. And I think back when he was doing when Don Callis was especially emphasized as a part of this whole shtick, he was definitely getting go away heat compared to just plain old heat. And we could talk about whether go away heat is good or not, because ultimately, as long as the fans are booing, they're accomplishing what they're accomplishing, right? But he already runs the risk of people really turning on him, and that could really, really fully do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, Peter, you're the one that brought this up, so I'm gonna give you the last word on this particular scenario. If AEW were to make the call, make the crazy radical decision to move Hangman winning the title all the way to Double or Nothing next year, how do you avoid fans turning on Omega?
As long as you put him in great matches, obviously we're going to talk about other guys coming in later, but there's so many people like new potential matchups that we can have. I mean, there's been the rumors of Daniel Bryan coming in. Omega versus Daniel Bryan is a dream match. You can put that in. You can put a certain former NXT champion who might be coming in. He's part of the story. That you've got. You got Darby Allin. You got. There's so many people in there. Omega Jericho 3. Even. They got to have a rubber match sometime down the line, haven't they? Mm-hmm. There's a lot of matches that Omega can have from now to May. And the thing about AEW is they're trying to make their titles mean something. That's the complete polar opposite of what WWE do. They try to make the AEW World Championship the most prestigious title in wrestling today. That is the game plan of Tony Khan. And if you have Omega versus Bryan for the AEW World title, that is, and you do that at Revolution, that is going to be an absolute barn burner. That is going to be, you know, to quote JR, a slobber knocker. It's going to be one of those great matches, and it's going to put a lot of eyes on AEW. So that's why I'm thinking, yeah, there's just a lot of potential great matches that Kenny could have for the world title, if defending his world title down the line. I mean, there's also the scenario that, let's say, Triple Mania, Andrade, sorry, I can't pronounce his name, beats Kenny for the mega title. He's also in the title picture.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of people there who have got a legitimate claim, you know, in AEW canon to actually have that title shot against Kenny Omega down the line. I think there's a lot of things you can do with Kenny. He's just got to rein it in a bit on the comedy. You know, apart from if you can do that, I don't see a problem with Kenny being a champion for more than a year. I think we'll see what happens. It's a fun time though, isn't it? I'm looking forward to it. It's, you know, a lot of questions right now, which can only be a good thing.
I think no one would object to Kenny Omega having Kenny Omega level matches. In fact, I feel like in a big way, a lot of go away heat that I've seen for Kenny, and it's not like X-Pac heat, but a lot of the heat that I've seen that people are like, oh, this has been an underwhelming title reign for Kenny, is all based on the fact that they're like, well, where's that 7-star classic from Kenny? It's like, he was in New Japan for what, like 6 years before he had that level of match with Okada? I mean, like, that stuff doesn't happen overnight. So I feel like for a lot of people, they're kind of saying, you know, this is Kenny Omega, but he's in first gear. We need him to be in third gear. And I suppose no one would complain if Kenny went into third gear and, you know, just started delivering classic match after classic match. We've already seen it. I mean, in my opinion, his match with Rey Fenix is the best match in the history of Dynamite. So I think he's already done that. But I do see where you're coming from. I think there are lots of other people that could stake claims. So if you wanted to delay the story, you could. And I think I suppose you could call us insiders. I mean, in the sense that we follow all these things very, very intently, and we look at the journalism and all this kind of stuff that's going on. We have a different perspective on it because we are so sure that we knew the direction for Hangman. So I do wonder if there are fans out there who, you know, just watch Dynamite every week and they enjoy it, but that's it. They're not part of the internet wrestling community. I wonder if it bothers them as much as it bothers us. You know, that's always a question in my mind, that if the average fan is like so attached to Hangman winning that if he doesn't win the title in the next month or two, they're going to be heartbroken and they're going to start, you know, complaining and turning on Kenny the way the internet wrestling community might. So I don't know. That's an open question. I'd have to actually talk to some people about that. Unfortunately, I don't know a ton of casual wrestling fans. Yeah. I know you guys.
Yeah, that's half the problem, I think, isn't it? I think it's half the problem. It's like that's why maybe the numbers are what they are right now for WWE, and AEW are doing great numbers compared. It's just like, you know, back in the day we had, I mean, was it 10 million people watching wrestling on a Monday night? Not really that number anymore, is it? Yeah,
well, I mean, you had over 10 million on an average Monday that were watching Raw and Nitro. And then, you know, that forget all of the people that were watching Thunder or SmackDown or Velocity, like all this other stuff that was going on, and Heat and all this other stuff. I mean, you could go legitimately every wrestling program that's put on major TV in a week would not equal what people were watching on a Monday night in the late 90s. So the demographic and number of fans has definitely changed. I'm not saying that's permanent, but you are absolutely right. It's a lot different than it used to be. A larger percentage of the fans now may be involved in the internet community, in the smart community, if you will. It may be a larger percentage of fans now than it used to be. So I don't know. Maybe that's changing. Maybe it will change. I'm not sure. But one thing we've kind of been, you know, not addressing the elephant in the room here. All of this news started about 2 weeks ago, not with CM Punk, but actually with Daniel Bryan. And we have talked to Cassidy Haynes, the man who broke the story about Daniel Bryan, Bryan Danielson, coming to AEW and actually putting pen to paper on that one. So we've spoken to him about that. Go check out that podcast if you haven't already. It's on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, all those places. So go check that out. The Man Who Broke the Internet. But we're talking about all this fantasy booking stuff, and we haven't yet talked about where Bryan Danielson would line up with all this if and when he debuts on Dynamite. So Ryan, we've been going through all this potential, how do we push back Hangman? Where does CM Punk fit in? But if it is going to be Bryan Danielson that comes to AEW as well, where does he fit into all this? And do AEW need to further change their plans because he's showing up?
I have no clue. But before I tell you what I think that he could be doing in AEW, or what at least I would like him to do, I think we should just mention the fact that Bryan Danielson's easily one of the greatest wrestlers of all time. Let's just establish that right now. I couldn't tell you a bad match he's ever had. And if he has had a bad match, it's probably not his fault, honestly. So I think what he brings to the table is that he could pretty much have a great match with just about anyone. It's easily going to elevate just about anyone on the roster who wrestles him. So I think just from that angle, him being there, regardless of what role he has, is going to be majorly huge for AEW. A lot of those wrestlers on the roster, if you ask me, they're pretty much as good as their opponents, right? So Bryan Danielson could easily be that guy to help either the less established wrestlers or the more established wrestlers who need a little in-ring work. He could be the guy to help expose their strengths, basically. I think that would be awesome. Now, I think the best way to accomplish that would be for him to almost play the character he played in Ring of Honor around 2006, where he pretty much knows he's the best in the world and he's pretty cocky about it. Because at this point, I don't think you can have him play the underdog that he's played so well in WWE. A lot of those guys on the roster are smaller, so it's not like he'll have the same dynamic as he had against Batista and Randy Orton or Roman Reigns or whatever. So he's going to really have to adjust once again how he works in order to make it work for the rest of the roster. Not that that's an issue. Out of any wrestler in the world, he's pretty much the best at adjusting to other people's styles and making it work. So I think I can't imagine him entering AEW automatically as the bad guy. I could see him entering the company as the celebrated hero. He'll have a good few matches against some of the heels of the company, have great victories over them, but then really start unraveling and showing that he could have a dark side and have an aggressive side like he once did. So that's where I would like to see him go. I think at this point, AEW has a lot more faces than heels. And I think a big part of that is the fact that the company's two top champions are heels. Kenny Omega, Miro. Britt Baker too, but obviously he's not going to fight her unless they change their stance on intergender wrestling, which they should, by the way, but that's a whole other story for another time. He could be a really great heel asset for the company, and anyone who is able to defeat him is gonna come out looking amazing because everyone knows how great of a wrestler he is and how awesome his heel work is gonna be as a character as well. So that's how I would book things, I guess.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. I think what's difficult about bringing in guys like this, and as well as a couple guys that we'll talk about in a minute, what's very difficult about AEW's position is they have quickly become the company that uses wrestlers right. I mean, think about anyone who has been released from anywhere over the last year and a half. It's always been, X to AEW because AEW is going to use them right. And what that creates is a situation where it's very hard to bring in any established star as a heel, because the fans are just so happy to see them in a place where they feel as though they're going to get used correctly, that it's going to be very difficult to... So Malachi Black is a really good example. He is a heel, there is no question about it. But I think on Homecoming, when he has his first match against Cody is an absolute babyface. He gets cheered like a babyface, but he's going to get booed. Malachi Black is going to... If you didn't know any better, you would think that Black would be the babyface there. And I think AEW does have that issue because you're right. They have fewer heels than babyfaces right now. Maybe that will change if and when they have a babyface as champion. Because, you know, when you had Darby Allin as TNT champion, there were several heels that stepped up to fight him. So maybe it could change. But, you know, for right now, the problem with, you know, CM Punk is never going to get booed ever. It doesn't matter what he does. I mean, he could kick a puppy out of the ring and people would still probably cheer him, especially if it was in Chicago. So it doesn't matter what he does. He's going to be cheered. And Bryan, I think, could be a similar situation. Now, the thing about Bryan is he's an effortless babyface, in my opinion. He's a really good heel as well. But he's effortless as a babyface because his selling is so good. It's so believable that from a physical storytelling perspective, there's almost no one who plays the babyface the way Bryan Danielson does. So it's just an interesting position to put him in, and interesting to try to slot him in as, you know, he's going to have to be a main event level guy, but who does he feud with, and how close do you get him to the world championship? Because they have done this, and when you look at like Christian Cage, when he debuted, they put him in the world championship. They put that idea in your mind almost immediately when he picked up the world title and looked at it and looked at Kenny. So that idea was in your head from moment one with Christian, and yet he hasn't been anywhere near there yet. We talked about that on the podcast a couple days ago. Go check that out. But I feel like I'm personally, in my fantasy booking mind, at a loss for what you could do with Bryan Danielson right now. And I agree with you, Ryan. If you wanted to do the Ring of Honor kind of character with him, I think that would work. You would just run into a Britt Baker problem where you have your heel who's being cheered, so it's hard to book someone against him because they're not going to get the desired reaction from fans. So, Peter, can you shed some light on this? Where would you put Daniel Bryan? How would you handle him when he comes to AEW?
Well, the first thing is, I mean, nobody's talking about the Forbidden Door. It wouldn't surprise me if he went to Japan for a couple of months. I mean, I don't know. I guess travel restrictions are obviously a bit weird in Japan right now. You have, obviously the quarantine and all that. But it wouldn't surprise me if, for example, Daniel Bryan went to Japan on January the 4th. Mm-hmm. That wouldn't surprise me, and do like a Forbidden Door thing. I mean, you can take part in the New Japan Cup. I mean, dare I even say G1? I mean, not this year probably, but the year after. He's not going to be on a full-time contract in AEW. I wouldn't be surprised if he picks his shots. I mean, he kind of like wrestles who he wants to wrestle, which is the next point that I think needs to be made about Daniel Bryan is there were times when we all remember his little mini feud with Duke Gulak, just before the pandemic. I mean, he had a great match at Elimination Chamber a month before the pandemic happened, and they went on a storyline where Duke Gulak was coaching him, and that was all Daniel. Daniel Bryan will probably want to wrestle Phoenix. He'll want to wrestle Pentagon. He'll want to wrestle, he'll probably want to wrestle Orange Cassidy. He'll probably want to wrestle. That'll be the first match he probably wants to do, knowing Daniel Bryan. He'll want to basically wrestle. He's probably got like a list. I can imagine that first meeting that he has with Tony Khan. He probably goes, "Here's my list. This is who I want to wrestle in this order, please." And he could be, hey, who knows? He might want to wrestle QC Marshall. Who knows? Probably not.
Well, you never know. If he wants to wrestle Anthony Ogogo, that's where you've got me hooked right there.
Oh yeah. But yeah, I think I think I wouldn't be surprised if you saw Daniel Bryan versus Kenny Omega at Revolution. That wouldn't, or even Full Gear. I mean, it's the beauty of this. Is like there's just so many opponents for Kenny Omega right now. Is that and Daniel Bryan's one of them. It would have. I mean, Eddie Kingston comes to mind. He would probably love to face Eddie Kingston. That would be a match that Daniel Bryan would love to have. I mean, I'm just looking at the list right now. John Moxley. You got Jungle Boy. I think it's just like he just wouldn't surprise me if you see Daniel Bryan just do like 2-month feuds, and just like literally just transition to different people every 2 months to have like a quick feud with. Because I think he wants to have fun. That's what it feels like to me. He just wants to have wrestling matches against people who he likes, basically.
Yeah, well, and I don't want to speculate about his personal financial situation, but it certainly feels as though money is a secondary concern for him right now. Not that it will be a concern. He's a WrestleMania main eventer, and he will get paid a lot of money to be in AEW. There's no question about that. So I think in that sense, if what's most important to him is, you know, having matches against the next generation of guys that he helped inspire, you know, guys that probably watched Ring of Honor when he was in it. Those are the kind of guys that are now coming onto the wrestling scene. And so if that's what his goal is, then I suppose it doesn't really matter how close or far away he is from the world title picture. I think that would just be an issue for the fans. You know, if any of them are saying, well, you have Daniel Bryan, why is he not world champion? Okay, that's fine. I mean, you could say that I had an argument with a friend a few days ago. He's talking about how are the Lucha Brothers not champions? You know, I'm like, look, I love the Lucha Brothers as much as the next guy, but I love the Young Bucks as champions. Like that's if it's a similar thing with the world title, then I think that's a good problem to have, in my opinion. Speaking of fantasy booking, these two guys, CM Punk and Daniel Bryan, are two guys that we at this point are pretty positive are headed to AEW. But now I want to get into the bigger news of the day, or I should say the more relevant news of the day that just broke within the last 24 to 36 hours, depending on when you're listening to this. And that is, of course, the release of Bray Wyatt from WWE and the story that Adam Cole has declined a contract extension, so his contract will be up at SummerSlam, I believe, is the story. These are two very interesting cases that have divided a lot of opinion, especially in the case of Bray Wyatt, about what should be their future as it relates to AEW. This always comes up when you get any kind of name released from WWE, and these two guys are two of the most, I would say, I guess you'd say two of the most beloved stars that WWE has helped create over the last few years. Obviously, they didn't create Adam Cole, but he got a bigger platform in the U.S. with WWE than he had before. So I think it's two very interesting situations. So let's start with Bray Wyatt first. He's got presumably 90 days on his no-compete before he even thinks about, you know, what he wants to do, whether he wants to join AEW. There's been a lot of people that have advocated both for him coming to AEW and have said that they don't want him anywhere near AEW. I've seen both. I think both are legitimate opinions. So, Ryan, I'm going to ask you this first. In the case of Bray Wyatt, should he have a future with AEW? And if he should, what should that future be?
I don't know. Honestly, he's a character, or he's a person who seems to be well loved by wrestlers along with fans, but the one thing that's kind of been preventing him from being a possibly transcendent talent is a mix of character work and booking, you know? So when he first joined NXT, he was this creepy cult leader, and since then the Bray Wyatt character progressed into a supernatural guy, and then the Fiend. And so the Firefly Funhouse was easily one of the best things to come out of the pandemic era, but like overall, the general booking and the character the Bray Wyatt character, I don't know how that would translate anywhere else besides besides WWE. Who knows what type of character he wants to do, or elsewhere, wherever he ends up going, if he ends up going somewhere else. But I think that at this point, the only place that could really, I guess, adapt to the characters he's been portraying for the last few years is Impact Wrestling. You know,
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
think about when they have done the storylines with Jeff Hardy and Matt Hardy, and then you got that whole crazy thing going on with Su Yung and Allie and Rosemary.
Yep.
That whole deal. They're obviously not afraid to do supernatural type stuff, but not like, unless Lucha Underground comes back, I don't see Wyndham Rotunda doing anything quite like he's been doing. So I think he would have to adapt his character, or maybe even do like a Matt Cardona type situation where he just kind of shows up, kicks ass, and proves he doesn't necessarily need those wacky characters. In terms of AEW, I think that if he adjusted his character back to the cult leader, that could be a fun way to contrast against the wackiness that the Dark Order is. Or if he wanted to show up in like Ring of Honor or wherever, I think that he's a decent enough of a wrestler to make whatever they throw at him work. It's just a matter of what he does in terms of character work, how he adjusts, or if he completely changes what he's doing.
Yeah. So I absolutely agree with you that his later stuff in WWE, with the Fiend and the split personality and all that stuff going on, that is tailor-made for Impact. They love doing that stuff. They have the whole Decay storyline that's been going on, involving Rosemary and Black Taurus and Crazy Steve, all that kind of stuff that they've been doing. It certainly seems as though that would be something that would really belong on Impact. I think it depends on what he wants. So I'm not gonna speculate about any of what he wants or you know what his vision might be. All I will say is, if he's looking at this and saying, my favorite character was the kind of cult leader in NXT, and there's a solid possibility that that's the case. I remember WWE released one of their documentaries about Florida Championship Wrestling, and they spent a few minutes talking about Bray Wyatt, and they would show videos of him in their promo classes, and he was cutting those types of promos. Like, he was cutting the kind of cult leader type promos, and then he took inspiration from the Waylon Mercy character that was on WWF in, I think, the early to mid 90s, if I'm remembering correctly. That's
you
where a
got
lot of his
right.
Yeah, so that's where a lot of his inspiration came from. So I feel like if he's saying, I want to be that kind of character, like I want to be creepy and unsettling, but not in a supernatural way, that could belong on AEW, because AEW is not beyond doing some crazy gimmicks. I mean, they have a guy in a dinosaur mask who thinks he's a dinosaur, so obviously they're not beyond doing something a little out there. I think supernatural would be a little beyond what they want to do. The closest they ever got was with Matt Hardy, and that was a comedy thing. I don't think they'd ever play supernatural as a serious thing. When they tried with the Dark Order before Brody Lee, it really did not go over well. So I don't think that they would do that. But the kind of just unsettling, sort of like spine-tingling creepiness that Bray Wyatt is really, really good at, that I think could work on AEW. So then it's just a matter of whether, first of all, whether he wants to do it, and second of all, whether AEW thinks that he will fit. I personally love the cult leader Bray Wyatt gimmick. I think it did exactly what it was supposed to do. It made all the hairs on the back of my neck stand up whenever he was on. You know, it was just creepy. Like, there's something that's not right about him. And I would like to see him get a crack at that, where he has almost total creative freedom. I think he has really good ideas, so I would like to see him get a try at that. But it is really whatever he wants to do. Peter, what do you think could be the realistic future of Bray Wyatt? Could he fit in AEW, or does he not really fit the bill of what AEW is going to want from someone like him?
I'm probably I don't think he fits in AEW whatsoever. I just don't think he fits in. It's almost like Malachi Black is basically doing what we all want Bray Wyatt to do. He's Malachi Black has all these ideas in his head of what he wants to do in the ring, and and it just feels like you're going to have two. This town isn't big enough for the two of them. It feels like it's like, and I think they've already got Malachi Black there. What I think you might end up. Okay, here's a really, really bold prediction. I don't think Bray Wyatt ever wrestles a professional wrestling match ever again.
Mm-hmm.
I think he might go into acting. It really wouldn't surprise me if he went into acting or just.
I think he'd be good at that.
That would not surprise me. It really wouldn't. I think it's kind of, we have this obviously yearning to have if anyone gets released, it's like, oh, let's have him go there. Let's have him go there. It's kind of like maybe Wyndham Rotunda doesn't want to wrestle ever again.
Mm-hmm.
He's a WWE for life guy. It's like some of these guys you get are WWE lifers in their head, and maybe he just doesn't want to rest. I think he goes into acting. I think that's a bit of a bold take from me, I guess, but it wouldn't surprise me.
It's completely legitimate. I think it's a similar thing that people were talking about when Braun Strowman got his release, and people were saying, "Look, this is a guy who owes his entire wrestling career to WWE. Rather, he's a WWE lifer, and so." A lot of people were saying, this probably just sets up him restructuring his deal and coming back. Maybe Bray Wyatt is the same. I hate speculating about things like this because there are people who do this. Our friend Cassidy Haynes at Body Slam, and obviously Meltzer and Alvarez and Sean Ross Sapp, and there are people who are more connected with this situation. And so I hate speculating, especially because Bray Wyatt was very open about the fact that he was struggling with Brody Lee's death. That was a real issue for him. So I hate speculating about anything like this because we just don't know everything. But I agree with you. If he's just done with wrestling, I think he'd be a really good actor. And I feel like he just kind of has that quality. Like the way that he talks and his delivery, it's very hard to describe, but it just feels like he has something that a lot of people don't. So I think a lot of people, when they want to see him in AEW, what they're really saying is he is a very unique wrestler in the sense that he is such a unique character that we haven't seen really anyone do, at least in American wrestling, for a long time, if ever. And we want to see uniqueness in AEW. I think that's what a lot of people really want from the Bray Wyatt gimmick, or Wyndham Rotunda, whatever he wants to be. And I can respect that, but there certainly is a lot of unique stuff going on in AEW with or without him. So I think the best thing to say is whatever he wants to do is what he should be doing. I don't think he should force himself to go to AEW if he's done with wrestling. It seems like a basic thing to say, but I think that's just a good way to go about things whenever we speculate like this.
Maybe he goes into his dad's business and goes into becomes a tax man. Who knows?
He might be the most effective IRS agent in history. If he just if you got a call from Bray Wyatt who's talking about how you're late on your tax returns, you're like, all right, no, I'm paying 90%. No, you got it.
Right.
Oh man, all right, now that idea is in my head, I kind of want that. Not for me. I don't want to be called by Bray Wyatt, but I would like to know that has happened to someone. One guy though that no one wants to see leave wrestling anytime soon is Adam Cole. This is a developing story, but it certainly seems to be confirmed by several different reporters. Adam Cole's contract is up at SummerSlam, and he has declined multiple times to re-sign, to do a new deal. So it certainly seems as though he's going to be a free agent imminently. And this is a very interesting situation, I think. Adam Cole was one of the most over wrestlers in NXT. He was the head of the Undisputed Era, which is one of the best factions that WWE has put together in the last 10 or 15 years. Going back even before his NXT days, he was part of Bullet Club. He was part of the original Elite. He's great friends with many of the guys who now run AEW. Great friends with Cody and the Young Bucks and all those guys. So this is a very interesting situation. Not to mention that is it his wife, or is he married to Britt Baker, or are they just dating? I can't remember.
I think it's just a dating thing, yeah.
Okay. So they're just dating. Either way, his girlfriend is also in AEW and is the current AEW Women's Champion. So there are a ton of links between Adam Cole and AEW. So my question to you guys, we'll start with Ryan. Should Adam Cole go to AEW?
Just logistically, it would be so much easier for him to go to AEW, considering what you just said. He's with Britt Baker, and he has so many friends over there. I think just from that angle, he'll fit in just fine. I think the fact that there's a lot of crossover in terms of fans who watch NXT and fans who watch AEW, or at least fans who have appreciated Adam Cole's work regardless of whatever company he's in, and fans who like AEW. So people will definitely follow him wherever he goes. You know, I think at this point, NXT was just the best way for him to expand his reach, I guess. AEW, in terms of his booking, in terms of whether he gets put into any title scenes, whatever, I really have no clue where he fits in, because in NXT, it made sense for him to be the top guy because almost immediately he was the most popular person there, besides maybe like, I don't know, Johnny Gargano.
It's a short list, like Gargano, Ciampa, maybe Andrade. It's a very short list that would be in that area.
And even as a heel, he was definitely easily the most popular guy there. I was in the crowd for NXT TakeOver 25, and where Adam Cole beat Johnny Gargano for the championship that Johnny Gargano won just like 2 months before that. And Adam Cole was easily the most popular person that night, you know? So it's like a Daniel Bryan situation where he'll end up in the company probably as a heel, because he's pretty much been a heel his entire career, or at least out of what I've seen, he's been a heel, and he's going to be cheered, you know? So from that perspective, it's going to be a little bit weird. In terms of the matches he has, I don't know how it's going to work out, because out of anyone in NXT or Ring of Honor or wherever he's been, as a wrestler, he's been one of my least favorite guys. Once again, I appreciate him as a character, I appreciate him as a promo, and by the sounds of it, he's one of the most professional wrestlers out there, and all the wrestlers love him, so like, he'll fit in wherever. But like, as a wrestler, he's definitely not my favorite, because I almost feel as if he's trying to cosplay as these New Japan heavyweights, but that match style doesn't work for who he is as a wrestler. So that kind of makes things a little bit weird for me anyways. I don't know where he fits in, whether he immediately gets, if he even ends up in AEW, if he ends up at the top of the card or mid card, he'll definitely not be in the low card. He won't be a dark elevation regular. He'll definitely consistently be on Rampage or Dynamite, I would imagine. But I don't know. Who knows? We'll see. It's going to be interesting, though.
Yeah, I think Adam Cole, in my opinion, he's almost engineered to be a faction leader. I mean, he was so effortless with that in NXT. The Undisputed Era was, I think, a great story for most, if not all, of its time. And certainly when he was the head of it, that was when they were doing their best work. He was great when he was a member of Bullet Club in New Japan. He did some great work there. And so I feel like AEW often gets criticized about the number of factions they have and that it's too much. But I think if you were to add one more, I'd like to see him be the one to lead it, or at least be heavily involved, because I think that's where he's really good. His interactions with other wrestlers is what to me makes him stand out more than most. They're believable. The way that he has conversations, the way that he reacts to other people, it's very believable. I mean, it sounds like such a weird thing to compliment him on, but I think a lot of wrestlers struggle to react to people around them. Like we've all heard the phrase "acting is reacting," and Adam Cole has really mastered that particular skill in terms of reacting to people around him. So I would like to see him in that sense, not be a lone wolf, not be like a Malachi Black, but really come in more the way that Brody Lee or Matt Hardy came in, where there's people around him already that he can associate with. Peter, I can already tell that you're a fantasy booking kind of guy, so let's assume for a second that Adam Cole is going to go to AEW. So let's say in October or November, whenever the time is, Adam Cole shows up in AEW. How should his first few months look if he is going to show up at that time?
Well, I think he's going to be linked to the Elite. It just makes sense, It's kind of like if fans of the Elite know who Adam Cole and his history with that group of wrestlers, with Kenny and with the Young Bucks and with the Good Brothers. So there's a link there. Now the question is, does he join the Elite or does he go against the Elite? I mean, the thing is, though, it's like I think Kenny has got enough people on his mantle for like potential opponents for his title that Adam Cole is probably not going to be one of those. It would be a good story, like it's Adam Cole, just even like subconsciously the story of NXT's best wrestler against AEW's best wrestler, even though you can't say those words for legal reasons. That's a good story to tell those the people who are watching it, who are AEW fans and are NXT, who also watch NXT. It's a good, it's not exactly Flair versus Hogan in 1991, but it's something that you could do. But I think what has been said throughout this show has been, there are a lot of baby faces in AEW and they're not enough heels. So I think you're going to have to put Adam Cole on the heel side, put him with the Bullet Club, and dare I say, maybe when Omega loses the title, that's when the big split happens, and maybe you put Omega and Cole against each other going forward. That may be an option.
I think, much like Britt Baker, I've said this, and Ryan has heard me say this, so he'll recognize this phrase. The heelish tendencies of Britt Baker are the feature, not the bug. And for Adam Cole, in my opinion, it's the exact same thing. When you watch him in NXT, the heelish stuff he did, that was the reason people loved him. They didn't love him in spite of that. They loved him because of that. So kind of the arrogant way that he carried himself and the Adam Cole Bay and all the stuff that he did, that was the reason fans loved him. So I think you shouldn't shy away from booking him as a heel, even if he's going to get cheered, because that's just always going to be how it is. I think there's no way you can change that. I think if you tried to turn him babyface, fans would actually sour on him at some point. I mean, they'd like it at first, but I feel like after a little while... Yeah, go ahead.
It depends on how you book him. It's like, the point, it's interesting, like, as an 11-year-old watching WWF, as it was known then, in 1997, Stone Cold Steve Austin was the same person that he was post WrestleMania 13, that he was pre WrestleMania 13. He was just beating up the people that we all hated, either the Hart Foundation and Vince McMahon and Shawn Michaels. He was still, Steve Austin. Can I swear on this podcast?
Yeah.
He was a prick. Steve Austin was still a prick post WrestleMania 13. He was just facing all the people who were bigger pricks than Steve Austin. So I think if you can, he doesn't have to. Adam Cole doesn't need to slap hands and kiss babies Kiss Babies as a babyface. He can still be Adam Cole baby, Big Baby. You know, he can still be a prick. He can just be a lovable prick, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that actually makes perfect sense. I thought that AEW has been struggling with this with Britt Baker since she became champion. How do we book her? How do we do that? But that analogy actually makes a lot of sense. You know, it's about who you're feuding with more so than your own character. So, yeah, I could definitely see that. Ryan, if we're talking about this, if we're talking going that direction for Adam Cole with his character, who would be natural opponents for him, do you think?
That's a tough one. I think
kind of put you on the spot there. I apologize.
It's all good. I don't know that there's a lot of wrestlers on the AEW roster who are really, I guess, hated enough to be in that position where they could make Adam Cole the de facto face, I guess you could say. Mm-hmm. I'm on the AEW website right now. I'm looking at everyone who's wrestling. I'm looking at who's the heels, who are the faces, and a good chunk of these people, like we've been saying, who are heel, are still well liked by the fans, you know? So yeah. I think we would, in order for that to really work, in order for Adam Cole to get the Stone Cold Steve Austin treatment, I guess you could say, we would have to take one of these wrestlers and turn up their heelness up to a 10, you know? I could see him fight guys like Pentagon Jr. We've seen him in Lucha Underground as one of the most sadistic wrestlers ever. Mm-hmm. But besides that, I really don't know. I have no clue what they could do. Because I think about when Adam Cole was in NXT, like you've been saying, they didn't try to make him a heel, even though he was a heel, you know? Mm-hmm. Obviously the implication was that he was a heel, but like, he wasn't really a heel. So yeah, I don't know, man. I don't know.
It's tough. MJF's the heel. MJF is the perfect heel. If you're going to do it, Adam Cole is a face, and you want that, you know, the heel that everyone hates. So MJF is your go-to guy.
Yeah,
it's not a good thing that it's not a good thing that MJF is the only person on the roster who could do that. Honestly.
You're absolutely right. MJF is a great heel. He's an old school heel. He plays the role really, really well. But yeah, I mean, outside of him, you don't have a lot of guys. I think AEW, if there's one mistake that they've made with what they've done with their booking and their characters, is they've kind of, what they've done is they've taken characters that people like and they've turned them babyface. So a great example is the Lucha Brothers, specifically Penta or Pac. So basically the whole Death Triangle, they turned them face. The reason they did that is because, I mean, they were heels when they formed, right? And they formed by attacking Orange Cassidy. So they were definitely heels. But when the pandemic started, Pac was trapped in England. He couldn't get over. And the Lucha Brothers were not on TV for a while. And then they came back. And you had this kind of swirl of the Lucha Brothers are great, Phoenix is incredible, then Pac returned and everyone loved to see Pac, and now they're baby faces. It's like, okay, I mean, they're fine. They're good baby faces. And let's be real, Ray Phoenix wrestles like a baby face. Like, a heel doing the kind of stuff he does generally is not what you usually like, because you don't want fans to be cheering for a heel doing, rope walks and all that kind of stuff. However, we are definitely in a different era of wrestling now. So in a sense, the old school mentality of you don't want the heel doing high flying stuff kind of still holds, but in a sense it really doesn't. You can have heels that do incredible things. And Pac, to me, is not a natural babyface. Like, they basically did exactly what Peter said. Pac's just the same person. It's just now he's fighting heels. But because they don't have any good heels, he's not a good babyface, where he can be a really, really effective heel character. He was against Kenny Omega in their feud, and they put together some phenomenal matches. And so that's a guy that I would like to see be a true heel. Andrade is a guy that I'd like to see be a true heel. And those are guys that I think could get booed. They could get the desired reaction as heels. It's more difficult now, you know? I feel like we've had this discussion before, and Ryan, I don't know if you were with us on a podcast where we were talking about this. I feel like you were, where it's very hard to have a really effective heel nowadays because such a large percentage of the community now are the smarks like us that we appreciate good wrestling and therefore good heels get cheered. So it's like the boos are go away, and if you're getting cheered, it's good whether you're a heel or a babyface. So I don't know if AEW is going to find some way to break the mold on that one. I hope they do, because it heel versus heel matches or heel versus face matches where the heel's getting cheered is a really weird one, and I don't think it can last for a long time without getting sort of draining in the sense that the booking will start to repeat itself if you have to avoid that.
Yeah, I think about like even like TV villains. I think about like Euphoria. I don't know if either of you have seen the show, but like Nate Jacobs, he's like he's the bad guy, right? And he's an awesome bad guy, but you hate the guy, you know?
Yeah.
Negan on Walking Dead, you know, when that whole thing went down when he first showed up, he was an awesome bad guy, but he was like legitimately hated, you know?
Yeah.
How do these promoters, how do these bookers, how do they get these wrestlers to be bad guys but still actually hated without them crossing the line into like, I don't know, bigotry, for example, you know? Because like that's definitely still a thing that's happening that shouldn't be happening, but like how do these I don't know. It's so crazy. Is it possible for that to happen? You know, I think even like when Jungle Boy was feuding with Kenny Omega, it wasn't that Kenny Omega was like a bad person and that's why he was getting booed. It was because Jungle Boy was just that good and that popular and that well liked that Kenny Omega was getting booed the way he was. So is there really a way for the wrestlers and the bookers to make bad guys again without really crossing the line?
Mm-hmm. No, that's a really great point. I think in a weird sense, we might be going all the way back to the old school. If you looked at WWF, and to an extent even like Jim Crockett, things that were going on in the 70s and 80s and even into the 90s, what you would have is babyface champions that were champions for huge stretches of time. I mean, Bruno Sammartino was the WWF champ for like 10 years. And he was the biggest star in the company and he was a babyface. So it didn't matter who went against him, they were getting booed. Whether it was a real heel or whether it was a babyface. I mean, there wasn't really the concept of the cool heel hadn't really come around back then. But you could have a babyface feud with Sammartino and still get booed. And then you would have a transitional champion, a heel. So whether it be Ivan Koloff or Iron Sheik or something like that, you would have your transitional champ. And then you go back to a super long babyface run again. So you'd have Playboy Buddy Rogers, or you would have Hulk Hogan, something like that your biggest star is a babyface. So I wonder if we're not moving back into that direction where you have to have a babyface champion. Like I say this because I'm looking at Britt Baker's title run, I'm looking at Kenny Omega's title run, and I'm thinking like, man, it's hard to be a heel champion these days. And AEW, most of AEW's history has had a heel world champion. Chris Jericho was a heel, and now Kenny Omega's a heel, so the only one in the middle is Mox. And it just feels to me like maybe we're going back to the old school where if you're a real heel, if you're like an MJF, you can't be champion for that long. It just won't necessarily work like that. Am I wrong about that?
The two greatest periods in WWF history were Hogan and Austin.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like it's I think it's one of those. It's like I think fans want to see, an ending which makes them not depressed. Well, it's a happy ending. They want to see the champion vanquish all. That's what made those two eras so great. It was just basically what you just mentioned. It was like babyface champion, heel of the month, and with Hogan it was Orndorff. It was Killer Khan. It was Kamaru. Then it was Andre, and then it was Ted DiBiase, and then and that's what made the Hogan reign so great. And then with Austin, it was obviously McMahon. And you had Dude Love, you had The Undertaker, you had Kane, you had Triple H. It was just like, and as a kid growing up, my favourite wrestler growing up, and I did an article, my first article on PW Musings was about Shawn Michaels' 1996, and it was about it was about the bad guys that were coming up against him, and as a 10-year-old, I remember having sleepless nights the night before Good Friends, Better Enemies and SummerSlam. And Mind Games, because I was like, oh my god, Mankind's going to beat Shawn Michaels for the world title. It's what it hooked you. If your hero is going to defend, that's what that if the babyface champion is defending the champion, and you want to see him hold on to it, that's what drew me in, and that's I don't want to see Bobby Lashley defend the title, beat Kofi Kingston in 7 minutes. I don't want to see that.
Yeah.
That's not the wrestling that I want to. I want to watch it's a good guy versus a bad guy, and the good guy wins. That's how all the great movies are done. Every single great movie, the good guy won. Every single Avengers movie, bar one, the good guy won. They're doing all right. The MCU is making a lot of money off that formula. Yet in professional wrestling, bookers seem to think, hang on, let's have the bad guy win every week. It feels like, and people are wondering why people don't want to watch the WWE anymore. It's not rocket science. It's not, it's like, sorry. So I was going to go on a rant there about WWE cooking, but it's just not. It just annoys me because the MCU make all this money from a very easy formula, which wrestling in 2021 is not sticking to.
I agree with you in that sense. Like, a lot of this, it doesn't have to be complicated. People resonate with heroes, and they want the good guys to win. And so eventually the good guys should win. So I do feel like every title reign can sort of be thought about as a movie, right? You kind of have, and so if you have a heel champion, so for example, Miro being TNT champion, that's not the end of your movie. That's the middle of your movie, right? Darby Allin was the beginning. He was the good guy, and he got killed by Miro. And so now you need to have a good guy that's going to vanquish Miro, and that's the end of your movie. That's the climax, and people go home happy. So a lot of people have said it should be Jungle Boy. I could easily see it being Jungle Boy because he's a hero that people get behind. So that's a good story to tell. Good guy conquers the bad guy. I think that there's a tendency to sort of overthink ourselves when it comes to wrestling booking. Because wrestling is so different than any other art form in the world, we tend to have this sense that therefore the booking of it, the storytelling of it, has to be different because the action is different. And in a big way, I mean, I remember when I first got into pro wrestling and people around me, I grew up with no one in my family, no friends, no one around me was a pro wrestling fan when I first started to get into it. And so people would ask me, why do you like wrestling? And I would tell them, it's like a TV show. It's, like I love Game of Thrones. You love Game of Thrones? I love Game of Thrones. It's like Game of Thrones, but except instead of the battles, it's wrestling matches. And I think that that's a formula that people feel like, oh, it's too boilerplate. We got to get away from that. And I think it's a formula that works. It's a reason why it's been around for this long. So, yeah, I'm with you. You don't need to overthink yourself when it comes to that. And to bring it full circle, that applies to the Hangman Page Kenny Omega storyline. You don't need to overthink yourself. People love Hangman Page. So that's your hero. Your climax of this movie, Kenny Omega as world champion, should absolutely be Hangman Page beating him for the title. And so I feel like if you're gonna overthink yourself on that, you're gonna kind of lose the plot of the story. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Before we get out of here, let's put a little bow on all this with probably the wackiest story that has come out of pro wrestling in the last few days, weeks, months, maybe, and that is that Ric Flair, the Nature Boy, one of the greatest wrestlers of all time. Speaking of cool heels, he was the original cool heel. He requested his release from WWE. He's gone. So he's a free agent. He's out there, and normally I wouldn't say anything. I wouldn't really care that much, but we are talking about Ric Flair. We are talking about one of the greatest wrestlers in the history of the sport. So for him to just be out there, even at his age, is very interesting. So I wonder if there's something that he wants to do, or if he just is done with wrestling and wants to retire. I don't know. I don't want to speculate, but because that's the news of the day, I feel like we might as well just close the show talking about it. So, Peter, Ric Flair's out there. He's on the free market. What does he do? Where do you want to see him? Do you want to see Ric Flair anymore? Where do you stand on the Nature Boy right now?
Ric Flair, Sting, TBS. That sounds familiar to me. I don't know. I mean, I'm looking back at my wrestling history. That seems very familiar to me. I mean, to be fair, the other idea that I've seen a lot of people talk about is, I'm sorry, I can never pronounce his name. Andrade, is that how you pronounce it? I'm British. I can't pronounce it. Yeah. I mean, obviously we know who he's in a relationship with. We know that the father-in, I think is it father-in-law, potential father-in-law in Ric Flair. I mean, but the problem with that is I think if let's say Ric Flair became the manager of Andrade, I think that would end up being, I think Andrade would end up having more managers than Fulham FC did last season. So I think that's probably not a good idea, to be fair. So yeah, I don't know where Flair fits in. I think Flair will be in as a nostalgia thing with Sting one time, and Tony Schiavone can freak out. Maybe you can interview him and in front of a set, and Flair can take off his shoes and just yell for like 5 minutes, like the good old days. But yeah, I don't see. I think Flair's probably limited in what he does, but yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, fair enough. Ryan, what do you want to see Ric Flair do or not do if all avenues are open to him? What would be the best option in your opinion?
I have no need to ever see him on television again, and for one big reason, just look up The Plane Ride from Hell. I'll leave it at that.
You know what?
So,
the Dark Side of the Ring is going to be very interesting to see what the blowback on that is going to be, because I think I know exactly what you're talking about.
mm-hmm.
I think the week after the Dark Side of the Ring documentary is going to be very interesting.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I agree. I think the thing about Ric Flair, he still has that star quality about him. You know, I mean, he walks out there and you're like, that's Ric Flair. I mean, that's like potentially the most famous wrestler of all time. I mean, there's a very short list. It's like Gorgeous George, Ric Flair, Hulk Hogan, and like The Rock. I mean, that's your list. And so he still has that quality. He's still a major figure in pop culture. So in that sense, he will always have relevancy as long as he is alive, which hopefully will be for a long time, given some of the health issues that he's had to deal with. The problem is from a functional standpoint. Obviously, he can't wrestle given his age, and as a promo, he has lost I don't want to say he's lost it. He cuts a promo the way it used to be acceptable to cut a promo, but that's not how people cut promos anymore. You know, I mean, that kind of the rambling style, I'm just going to say a bunch of stuff and it's going to sound cool and people are going to get energized kind of thing, that used to work and he was the master of it. But that's not really how promos work anymore. People don't want to see that. People don't respond to that. So in the case of him being a manager, the problem is that he's not a great fit, in my opinion, for being a modern manager because he can't cut a modern promo. So in that sense, I'm not sure where he really belongs. Maybe with the NWA, given his history in that company, maybe he could go there and, you know, just be a draw over there. The other thing would be for him to just kind of pop up at random places. One thing that would be really cool is, like, there's lots of songs that mention Ric Flair. I mean, like Migos had a song called Ric Flair, so I don't know if AEW wants to, like, do a concert or do one of those and then have Ric Flair come out and just be there, you know, a star the way he is. I guess that would be cool, but yeah, I mean, from the sense of what would we want to see him do in a real wrestling capacity, I'm not sure there's much I want to see him do anymore. But this is all speculation. I mean, I think it's entirely possible he's just like, I'm done with wrestling. I got a lot of money. I'm gonna go retire for real. You know, and if he does that, good for him. You know, he's been through a lot in his life, health wise. He's been through a whole lot. So, you know, I think no one would blame him if he just said, you know what, I'm done. I'm retiring and this is the end of the road. And that's, you know, that's cool. That's cool. There has been a ton of news around wrestling over the last number of days, weeks, months, and I assume that there will be a lot more. And where there is news, there is Pro Wrestling Musings. So you can be sure that this is not the last time that you will hear us just talk about the wrestling news of the day. We've got lots of writers, lots of opinions, and you know, this is just the tip of the iceberg. We're talking about speculation. Well, if any of this stuff does come to pass, you can bet the Pro Wrestling Musings will be there and we will be talking about it. So whether you're on YouTube or Spotify or Apple, wherever you are, give us a 5-star review, subscribe, whatever it is the thing to do. Please do that because there's always stuff coming out from Pro Wrestling Musings. And check out ProWrestlingMusings.com for all of our articles written by all of our writers that are some really, really excellent stuff that you should be checking out. But before we get out of here, you know the drill. Ryan, please tell the people where they can find you.
My Twitter is in the description. I'll be back on the podcast eventually. I'm still doing the various roundtables that Pro Wrestling Musings does. You'll see a few articles from me in the future. Talk to you all later.
That's right. Peter, where can the people find you?
So I'm at PeterEdge7 on Twitter. I'll be doing a weekly column, talking more about the stories being told in pro wrestling from a while back. My first ever column was last week, and we talked about Shawn Michaels' 1996 and 2 brawls that took place that really bookended his first world title reign against Diesel at Good Friends, Better Enemies, and at Mind Games against Mankind. And I really put forward the case that Shawn Michaels is one of the great brawlers in the history of pro wrestling.
Well, there is no fan base that is more connected to its history than pro wrestling, in my opinion. So that is well worth reading, I think. I have been Griff from GA. You can check me out on my personal YouTube channel at General Admission Wrestling. And while you're over there, if you're not already, subscribe to the Pro Wrestling Musings YouTube channel. We got all kinds of cool stuff coming. If there are good articles on ProWrestlingMusings.com, then you can bet there will be good videos coming out about those articles on the Pro Wrestling Musings YouTube channel. So give us a subscribe if you haven't already. We really appreciate it. As for the Pro Wrestling Musings podcast, we will be back in just a couple days talking about AEW Dynamite Homecoming, Malachi Black's debut, Miro versus Lee Johnson. There's going to be some great stuff to talk about. And, of course, Chris Jericho versus Juventud Guerrera. So make sure you check back with us for that. But until then, have a great week. Enjoy AEW, and we will see you on the next Pro Wrestling Music podcast. We appreciate you.
felt